In this video, we're going to be taking another look at VeChain and specifically taking a look at the long-term price action of VET and also taking a look at the short-term price action of VeChain as well. Guys, I know there's a lot been going on recently with VeChain taking a little bit of a tumble, and I want to reassure you guys with what is likely to come in the future. If you find this video useful and informative, do go ahead and hit that like button. I really appreciate it. If you're new, make sure you've subscribed and hit that bell, tapped on all notifications, and you won't miss a single VeChain update. Obviously, we have recently spoken about some fantastic news around shopping.io with basically VeChain partnering up there so you can spend your VeChain via places like eBay, Amazon, Etsy, etc. Now, obviously, I wouldn't be spending my VeChain. It has a much better use as a hodling tool for investment rather than, for purchasing. But that being said, there are some fantastic opportunities here for people who do want to actually utilize a VeChain in terms of a currency. And obviously that's a fantastic piece of news with the integrations with Amazon, eBay, and Etsy, etc. So pretty good stuff's been going on. But obviously the price hasn't really affected or been affected by this fantastic news. And this is often the case because ultimately fundamentals have very little impact on price. Ultimately, the technicals actually seem to steer this a little bit more. Obviously, you do have some big macro pieces of news that can affect price. This might be Elon Musk tweeting about Bitcoin, for example, and obviously everything taking a tumble. This is slightly different to the news around a fundamental or the fundamentals of a project with a partnership. Ultimately, the technicals were at a key point and we were going to see us basically pull back. This is something that we're talking about on Friday. So regardless of the fantastic news, ultimately we were expecting a pullback. And I'm going to go into that in just a moment. But the first thing I want to kind of let everyone know is what we're seeing inside the data. So obviously here we have the weekly view for VeChain, and we have got this fifth wave pushing VeChain up towards that $1.01 area. That's where I kind of have this kind of capped out at, unless there's some amazing kind of macro event that takes VeChain to that next level. But ultimately where I'm looking at this thing kind of topping out during this particular bull run, either the end of 2021, beginning of 2022 is going to be around that dollar level. And obviously you want to be securing or locking in some profits on the way up, sell on the way up. Don't just wait for that dollar to hit and then try to sell. The selling pressure at these theoretical or psychological limits of a dollar is going to be really, really high. So you're going to want to make sure you lock in profits en route towards that dollar. Leaving a little bit in the bank, of course, just in case it does go on to like $1.50 or anything like that. So we won't really talk too much about exit strategy here, but it's important that you do have one kind of mapped out early on. Now, the first thing I wanted to kind of talk everyone through is obviously the generalized fear and greed index, where we are in a state of extreme fear, at least according to this generalized fear and greed index. Now, obviously what we like to do is couple this with the artificial intelligence of advice.io. And here we can actually go into VeChain and see that VeChain has slipped down the ratings. It's actually now a C2 rather than C1 rating, and we can see that just here. And ultimately, we can see the fear and greed index has dropped down to a rating of D, so it is right back down in that extreme fear situation. And again, we obviously have the 𝗕𝗢𝗓 ratio, a rating of D, so liquidity is still a problem. Sharpe ratio, rating D, moving average rating of D. The profitability is, of course, still the best it can be, which is A1, with the peak end value demand B and B2. So there's a couple of things we really need to kind of take on board here. One is there is now a reasonable amount of fear when it comes to VeChain, and I'll get into why this is, despite some of that fantastic news. The liquidity issue is still not 100% certain as to why, but I imagine that there's numerous reasons for the exchanges being, attacked from regulatory points of view and all that kind of good stuff. But ultimately, I think that will improve shortly once we start to get a bit more traction going forward. Now, obviously, Sharpe ratio is now indicating that we have, or has been indicating that we have a risk to rewards. This is obvious after we had the crash, but we are closing the gap now. So I'm watching this thing close down, and ultimately we'll start to see an improvement on this shortly. I still have this kind of placed out with a significant run starting to happen on VeChain towards the end of the month and beginning of August. I think that's really where things are going to get interesting for many of these projects. So now we understand what the artificial intelligence is telling us, that ultimately there is extreme fear for VeChain. There are liquidity issues, there are risk to rewards, but the profitability is still there. So when we actually jump back down into the VeChain chart, we can go down into our daily view. Here we can obviously see the Fibonacci retracement tools with the extensions coming up here to $1.01. So we know where we're going there. We also have our immediate target here. This is the area that we're looking to get a closed candle above. This will signal us into this fifth wave pushing the price of VeChain higher. Obviously, we have a downward trend line and we have an upward trend line. These are intersecting, causing a triangular wedge for VeChain. This is quite clear and prominent on this daily chart. It's really easy to see that it started out up here on this 7th of May. This downward trend has been retested on numerous occasions. The 10th of May, for example, we have the 4th of June, it was retested and retested on the 4th of July, the 5th of July, the 6th of July, the 7th of July, and then obviously the breakdown retested again on the 12th, which was yesterday, and we're pulling back down today. And again, we are looking to basically come right into this triangular wedge here before we have this absolute explosion to the upside. Now, this lower area, this rectangle that's drawn out down here, this is the buy zone or the accumulation zone. Now, because we have this upward trend actually kind of forming this triangular wedge here, dropping below this trend line could see us actually come into this buy zone, but I do now want to actually alter this up a little bit. I'm going to take it up towards this area here. So again, now if we enter this buy zone at about 6.8 cent, again, right in the lower bound of our triangular wedge here, this is the last opportunity to potentially accumulate at this particular point before we go and surge the price to the upside. So for now, this is obviously entry point for me is now looking at 6.8 cent down to about 4.6. There's going to be a good accumulation zone right in here, so it's well worth just making note that this is potentially where you want to make the majority of your purchases. Otherwise, dollar cost average is always a good strategy. Okay, so now obviously we know there's a downward trend and there's an upward trend. This intersect actually happens on the 23rd of July, towards the end of the month. So my imagining here, guys, is that we are going to see a bit of pain before we see that gain. So the expectations for me right now are to actually start to see VeChain actually come down a little bit lower towards this 6.8 cent area here before retesting this area. I don't think we're going to get a breakthrough just yet. We're probably a week or so away from that. And once we break this downward trend, we're going to start seeing a significant rally with price. Obviously, it won't be a straight line, but it's going to be a significant one. So the first thing I want to do is actually just bring us back up into our weekly, right? So on this weekly chart, we can obviously see those 5 impulse waves to the upside. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this relative strength index that's currently at 46 on the weekly, and I'm going to show you the stochastic relative strength index. And this one is it's showing you something different. It's showing you actually where the momentum is, and right now it's in the floor. We actually have this placed at a 1.06, and this area, guys, we haven't been down here since we're at the bottom of wave 2. Okay, so when we're at the bottom of wave 2, it's the same place that we are now at the bottom of wave 4. So right now, this is a really good place to actually start seeing the momentum of VeChain really kick in and push to the upside. Again, we can see this momentum was all the way down here in the March crash. And then we started to see the rally up to the top of wave 1 before coming down in wave 2, going back up to wave 3, and now down in wave 4. So now we are understanding that we are likely to see this push to the upside on the stochastic relative strength index. That momentum's coming. That's going to take us and push us into this 5th wave. So we are very, very close to seeing the end of the pain, but there's going to be a little bit more before we actually get better. So really worth just pointing that out. We're going to jump back down into our daily. Here you can see that we are still a little bit way to go before we actually bottom out on the daily. So a little bit more still here. We're currently at 8.8 before we start getting that run to the upside. And this will be in line with our expectations towards, about the 20th or so. So around then is going to be a real key time for VeChain. So it's going to be a little bit more of accumulation before we absolutely have a breakout and a break up to the upside. So again, even though we're having this fantastic news, we can see that the resistance line just here across this line of our downward trend is why we haven't seen that breakout happen. This, coupled with how high our relative strength index was at the time, specifically on the hourly, you're going to get rejected from this area. And obviously gap rejection means that we are lowering it down a little bit here as well. Now, when we bring the volume in, you can see how the volumes were actually increasing whilst we were decreasing the price. That sentiment needs to change. But obviously, whilst we still have that fear in the space, that fear in greed index and extreme fear, that sentiment is still very much the same. As we push the price down, the volume will increase, and that will push the price even lower. So right now, we are looking to retest our support line. That support line is going to be basically inside our buy zone. So we're looking to basically accumulate some VeChain in here before we absolutely get that breakout. So right now, my expectations are that we are going to fall back. We're going to go up first, retest our downward trend one last time before retesting our support line, and then we'll have that break up to the upside, I believe. So we are a few days away, a week or so, before we see that. Now let's jump down into our daily. our hourly chart here. And from here, we can obviously see what's been going on. We can see this retesting of this area and getting the rejections from here. And obviously, we take a look at where we are on this stochastic every time we get up to these areas, right? We can see that they're right up there in the higher end area. And that's where we are right now. So the expectations are that we are going to be pulling back down into the buy zone and back down into here. This will correct the stochastic relative strength index. I'll take this one off as well now. We know where that is, and actually put on the relative strength index. And this one, if I just adjust it as well, actually shows us that we are, a little bit low, but we have still got the potential to basically pull this down a little bit lower. So right now it's at 37. My expectations are, even though we are running out of momentum here, that we'll bottom this out a little bit lower towards that 30 area, and then we'll start seeing a reversal. So my expectations, guys, will be that we'll push up before we'll kind of ride this thing all the way down. We'll retest our lower support level, and then retesting that area there should be the trigger to then see us really go ahead and push on breakout from this downward trend. So there's lots to kind of expect here with what we're likely to see before we absolutely do get a parabolic run for Bitcoin, for VeChain along with Bitcoin. Ultimately, all these things are converging together. I feel Bitcoin is also on a very similar trajectory, so we're likely to see that also follow that path. Now, if I go back up into our daily here, obviously, we cannot confirm anything until we're above 21.5 cent, and that's going to be the closed candle that we're looking for just there. And obviously, we want that to be a weekly closed candle. A weekly closed candle above this area is going to be the strongest signal that pushes us above into wave 5. And obviously, the first price target for VeChain comes in at 42.1 cent, followed by 64.9. 87.7, and then finally $1.01. It will be a bit of a journey. It won't be straight lines. We'll have lots of corrections en route. Lots of people basically calling out that we're going into a bear market, all of that kind of good stuff that you usually see. But ultimately, the expectations are that VeChain will eventually rise up towards that $1 level. I do not feel it will actually go much higher than that. That seems to be the level that we're looking for here, and the psychological one at that's going to be a huge barrier for VeChain. But only this particular cycle, long term, when we start thinking about 2025, I think VeChain is going to be very well positioned with many more partnerships, many more integrations, many more dApps that ultimately put it well placed to be one of the key players moving further forward in the life cycle of the crypto sphere. So ultimately, I see this as being a top 10 cryptocurrency eventually, and I think it'll be well deserved after everything that it is doing. Guys, hopefully you have found this brief update on VeChain useful and informative. Do expect a little bit more pain before it gets better, but we are going to be breaking out of this downward trend. That is my expectations. One last dip into a buy zone, and then we'll be taking out some of these key areas. Guys, if you found it useful, hit that like button. I really appreciate it. If you're new, make sure you've subscribed, hit the bell, tapped on all, and you won't miss another video. Guys, with this said, done, and out of the way, I hope you will have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.